I have purchased everything in Off the Grid so that you don't have to. I have tested every single weapon in the game, with and without attachments, to see what actually makes a difference in terms of firing guns in this game, and how you can be the most competitive. In this video, not only will I explain to you the weapons that are the most performant in the game versus the least performant, but I'll also talk about how some of these are being balanced, and how certain trade-offs are being made from a game design standpoint, and things that you need to look out for. Other than the odd full auto shotgun, which seemingly just deletes people at close range, Off the Grid is a surprisingly balanced game, and I find that most guns are very performant in very specific scenarios. So if it feels like you're struggling because certain guns don't feel like a jack of all trades, that is by design, and that is because every weapon in this game is supposed to perform quite differently. All of the testing for all of this took a very long amount of time, so if you could like this video at the bare minimum, share it with your mates, consider subscribing, or even becoming a channel member by clicking join, that would mean a world's worth of support, and it means I can keep producing content for those of you who enjoy Off the Grid. Now, before I break down the weapons in terms of which is good and which is terrible and why you should use it and what it's good at, I want to get rid of a couple of rumors and dispel some general misunderstandings about Off the Grid in terms of its meta and in terms of its gunplay. The first one is that there is zero difference between a white rarity weapon and a purple rarity weapon. The only difference is the number of attachments it can hold, and that can vary from class to class and weapon to weapon. White rarity items, which are common, tend to be able to carry a single attachment, whereas purple can do sometimes up to 4 or 5 depending on the gun. But in my experience from the testing I've done, the only major consequential difference you're going to notice from attachments are extended magazines. So if you're wondering if a weapon that's purple rarity is going to outgun you every single time, the answer is no. And actually, if you just slap on an extended mag onto any one of your given weapons, even if it is the lowest rarity, you will probably get, for the most part, the same results. In my view, in a fast-paced movement shooter like Off the Grid, the only major difference is the amount of ammo capacity you have to throw at a target. The base weapons themselves perform the way they perform for a reason, and very few of the attachments make consequential changes to how they perform. So even if you have the highest rarity weapon that you think is really good, and I tell you that it's worse than a different weapon today, I guarantee you that is just the case, and no amount of attachments is going to change that. Every gun in this way performs in a certain way for a certain reason, and based on my testing, the attachments don't make a consequential difference in the weapons themselves. And the reason for that is because we need weapon variety, and we need good balancing, and generally, for most of you who have felt frustrated that you haven't found a jack of all trades, that's by design. None of these guns are supposed to be the best gun, they're simply supposed to offer variations of different things, and all of them have pros and cons. The next big question I've seen a lot about is RR and CQ weapons, and these are just different variations of the same base weapon that are supposed to perform slightly differently. Now, this has been a little tricky to test because right now buying certain variations doesn't seem to actually save them to your profile, and it's quite difficult to equip them to your loadout, so it's very unlikely you're going to run into a huge number of these anyway. But for the most part, an RR variant is a slower, heavier version of the base gun that is supposed to be more accurate over range, and the CQ variant is quite literally a close quarters variant, which is supposed to be more lightweight at the cost of accuracy over range. So without further ado, let's dive into the weapons themselves and talk about their individual categories, and we'll start off with assault rifles because I think that's what most people are maining the most. Now, this is the layout in terms of what I've selected from best to worst. At the very top, you have the Vulture, and at the very bottom, you have the Casper and the Partisan. And the reason for this is just because the bottom weapons, in my view, are far too situational to be useful in the grand scheme of things. The Partisan and the Casper both have really good headshot multis, but just aren't that great. Up first is the Vulture. I think this is the best AR across the board. Not only does this have a hugely massive headshot damage multiplier that is higher than any other weapon in the category, as far as I can see, it has a very compact spread, and is basically just a better version of the M4 Commodore. The Terracon and the M4 Commodore share the same level in my view. They're pretty much two sides of a different coin. The M4 is faster firing, the Terracon is slower firing, the Terracon does more damage, the M4 does less. They're basically A and B sides of the same gun. And while some of you might already be in the comment section saying absolutely not, the M4 Commodore is the best thing since sliced bread, I have tested every single one of these weapons extensively, in terms of headshot multipliers, in terms of spread, in terms of damage drop-off. Trust me, what I'm saying here is pretty much gospel. And right now, that is how the structure sits in. And I would actually argue the Mavinga is somewhere between the Vulture and the M4 and Terracon. And the reason for that is this thing has a disgusting headshot multiplier. If you manage to get some headshots with the Mavinga, it is a pure skill cannon, but it comes at the cost of really slow bullet velocity, which is why some people are against using it. So, generally speaking, in the AR category, most of the top guns are highly performant, and whether you pick the Vulture, the Terracon, the M4, or the Mavinga, you're probably going to get very similar results. The reason I go for the Vulture is I think it's the best well-rounded weapon. It's good over range, it's good at close quarters, and that headshot multi really makes it perform when somebody pushes you up close and personal, and you don't have the time to switch to an SMG or shotgun. Next is SMGs, and at the very top of the list right now for me is the Woodpecker SMG, but you have to have an extended magazine for this thing. The Woodpecker is extremely powerful, has a huge amount of damage potential, but without an extended mag is basically useless. It's also really good at chopping off different opponents in terms of shooting off an arm or shooting off a weapon, and I would highly recommend using this SMG above the others. But that's not to say that the other SMGs are bad and that you shouldn't use them, and in fact, all of them offer very different benefits. Whilst I would say that the Woodpecker SMG is the best in terms of immediate close quarters, the Kite and Tacoma are actually far better all-rounded SMGs. The Kite has a very large magazine and a very fast rate of fire, whilst the Tacoma has a slightly smaller magazine, a slightly smaller rate of fire, but compensates in terms of damage. A bit like the M4 and the Terracon, these are kind of two sides of the same coin. I find the Kite and the Tacoma are quite interchangeable, but I find generally speaking the Tacoma is a little bit more consistent in terms of its TTK. You might be thinking to yourself then that I think the AZV-100 is the worst SMG in the game, and actually you'd be wrong. The AZV-100 has an insane amount of damage potential, especially in the headshot multiplier category. And whilst I personally don't use it because I tend to like more run and gun style SMGs, for something like a sniper support, this 3-round burst SMG actually makes sense because it boasts the least amount of damage drop off in the entire category and maintains a really nasty headshot multiplier. I personally have been interchangeably using the Tacoma and the Woodpecker, and I find those to be the best, but all of the categories across the SMG and all of the weapons that they have seem to actually have a space in the game that makes sense. If you want a spray and pray marksman magazine, go for the Kite. If you want something that's effective but limited, go for the Tacoma. If you want for something that's ultra limited but ultra effective, go for the Woodpecker. And if you want a sniper support, go for the 3-round burst AZV. In the shotgun category, there's only one shotgun worth talking about, and that is the Squall. It is literally the most disgusting weapon I've ever seen in any video game, and I really hope they nerf it soon. This thing can carry 12 rounds with an extended mag, full autos at any given range, and he actually surprisingly has decent damage range drop-off too. For the most part, the Squall is going to win pretty much any fight within 8 meters, but obviously with the inclusion of things like leaper legs and the ability to sprint away, any SMG will pretty much outgun any shotgun from around the 7 to 8 meter onward point. Whilst the Flember isn't necessarily a bad shotgun right now, it's just not that great in comparison to something that I feel is so overpowered that it needs nerfing. In the marksman rifle and sniper rifle categories, I'm going to treat these as kind of the same category because a lot of them share very similar damage outputs, and you might think that sounds a bit strange at first until you realize that the Proton and the Osprey are both 4 shots to kill for the most part. Now, generally speaking, snipers maintain their damage in terms of all ranges, and you won't notice any damage drop-off with these weapons, whereas marksman rifles have a bit more bullet drop and a bit more bullet deviation, and tend to have more limited damage range. If you want the maximum amount of damage in a short space of time, you should be using the Kestrel and the Proton. The Kestrel is a 2-shot sniper rifle for the most part, sometimes 3, the Proton is a 4-shot marksman rifle. The Osprey is a 4-shot sniper rifle, and the other general marksman rifle, whose name I struggle to pronounce, requires substantially more shots than the Proton, but fires substantially faster. So if you really trust your aim and your ability to get damage output across the field, use the Proton and the Kestrel. If you need a few extra shots in terms of error, or just because you move a lot, use the other marksman rifle or the Osprey. I would talk about the light machine guns, but in my view, they're just all horrific. None of these LMGs have any redeeming qualities at all. The Boomslang is incredibly slow in velocity and incredibly sluggish, and the Hawk has a better velocity but basically does no damage. Right now I'm kind of struggling to see how either of these guns fit into the meta, and neither of them feel particularly useful, so I wouldn't really bother with any of them as we speak. In terms of the pistols right now, there is something to be said about the 2-tap pistol, because it does appear to have 2 to 3 shots to the head if you want to take somebody out, so if you're looking for the best secondary, that's your answer. If you're looking for some loadout inspirations, right now my primary loadout consists of the Vulture combined with the Tacoma. I generally have been running this the most, and it's how I've been getting most of my 20 to 30 kill games, and I've recently started switching out the Tacoma SMG for the Squall auto shotgun, and using the Vulture as more of a medium range weapon, as not just necessarily a long range weapon. I really think the Vulture and the Squall together are basically a match made in heaven, and pretty much extremely OP, but the Vulture with any solid SMG or shotgun pairing is going to put you in a really solid spot. Right now, I would say that is without a doubt a meta loadout, and we will talk about limbs in a very separate video, and the reason for that is because there's so much to talk about. There's a lot of depth in terms of what you should be using in terms of arms and legs in this game, and how you should be combining them together, and how some of them actually work together to create certain outcomes. But right now I've been running dual phosphor arms because I'm ridiculously good with phosphor, and a phosphor stick is a one-shot down, and I'm a big fan of that. Hopefully this answers all of your videos surrounding the meta right now in Off the Grid. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Make sure to drop a like, and I'll see you in the next one.